Well, folks, this episode of the Noble Man Podcast is brought to you by the Manger Build Experience. If you go to that page on the Noble Warriors website, you can learn about how Noble Warriors has been helping men build mangers, life-size and small mangers, tabletop mangers, for a number of years, equipping dads to keep Christ in front of Christmas for their families. So check out the Manger Build Experience on our website, order a small manger kit, or get information about how your church can have a group of men build mangers with their kids and keep Christ in front of Christmas. Well, folks, welcome to the Noble Man Podcast. I am excited to have a new friend. He's a brother in Christ, but a new friend. Just met Dr. P.J. Dunn. He's out of Georgia, north of Atlanta. You said near Jasper. So welcome to the Noble Man Podcast, P.J. It's good to have you with us.
Good to be with y'all.
And I have to tell you, folks, that sometimes the way these podcast guests come on board is that sometimes it's people I've known for a long time. But in this particular case, I read an article in Lifeway Research. I get an email from them. I think sometimes it feels like 4 or 5 times a day. Honestly, it's not that frequently, but the title of the article that he wrote for Lifeway Research was "The Preaching Style That Reaches Young Adults." And man, I am constantly, you've heard us talk about this, we're constantly trying to figure out how do we reach the next generation. So lead us off, PJ. You invest in a lot of singles ministry. That's part of what you do. That's what this article is about. So tell me where the church is, you think, with engaging singles, especially young men, and just kind of kick us off with a conversation here.
Yeah, so kind of the premise is the more single we've gotten, the more the church doesn't want to be single. So if you were to go back over 40, 50 years, the average age of marriage was closer to 21, 22 years old, and now it's 30 or 31 for guys and somewhere around 29 or 28 for ladies. And so that delta has been huge. So if you went back to the late 80s, early 90s, we had hundreds of singles pastors. And hear me, I'm not for singles ministry, I'm for being single friendly. And so I just want our churches to acknowledge that, not run the program of that. And so when I go back and I research that, you know, back during that time, people were getting married somewhere around age 25 or 24. It had gone up a little bit. Well, then there was a huge spike. And then when we focused on the family, pun intended, we shut down all of our single stuff. And then we all said, where are the young adults? And so this conversation of singles and young adults really collide when you look at statistics like when you get married, but the average age for a first-time divorce is 30 years old, and 45% of first-time marriages end in divorce. And you start looking at single parents and the average age of a single parent being 31, and all these things start to come together, and it's like, oh man, young adults aren't who we thought they were, and people are living longer, and that's affected it. So that's kind of how like singles merged into talking about young adults and working with Lifeway to help elevate that conversation.
Yeah. Well, so I'm fascinated by the way you started that, and I want to go back to this statement. So let me see if I got this right. The more single we've gotten in the church, the less single the church wants to be. Did I state that correctly?
Single in America, right? And then the church wants to be less single. So we built these models, Mike, for like, you know, we have Billy Graham crusades, right? So I'm from Ohio originally. All of our churches were birthed out of Billy Graham's movement, almost all of them. But down here in Georgia, they all came off the Mayflower. Right. So like they just have like a different vibe down here. And I'm sure you have some of that in Virginia too, right? So
sure. Yeah.
And so what you have is these models that were built on 20-year-olds that have kids, 30-year-olds that have kids, and they're married and they stay married. Maybe their marriage has some challenges. And so we've just never rebuilt the system. So Sunday school is great, but Sunday school, when you just run it as a program and never look at the input and output, you know, becomes stale. And so churches are waking up after COVID and you know, our phones just going off like podcasts like these where people are like, man, how do we do this? Well, there wasn't awareness before COVID. There was just kind of this false premise that they'd come back after college, but something like 70% of people that go to college never finish. And the average age of a college student is 25 years old, right? Not 19.
Yes.
And so all those things kind of factor into the world has become more single and more okay with being single. Barna has a statistic that only 23% of churchgoers are single. But
Yes.
53% of America is single. So we have a massive delta there on our impact and growing churches.
Yeah, and so it's intriguing to me that are we okay with the singleness? I mean, sometimes I ask a church pastor the other day, has the church adopted the culture's posture towards singleness, and we just hide behind I'm called to be single, and we're not even pressing in on this idea of trying to encourage marriage. And I realize that's a delicate place to be. What are you finding about how the church should speak to that? Because that's tough. I think I read the statistics that say a lot of people who aren't married would like to be married.
Yeah. Somewhere near 70-80%, right? Like would like to be married. 90-something% believe in true love. Right. And so those statistics, those surveys are interesting. So Disney years ago went and they redid the Peter Pan ride. This was a couple years back. And everybody was like, how dare you touch the Peter Pan ride? That's perfect. It's amazing. They went in, they refurbished it. Everybody said it's better than it's ever been. I don't remember the old one. The new one's perfect. Right. If we listen to public opinion, we miss what they actually want. And so sometimes what we're hearing isn't what actual reality is. And so let me just say as quickly as possible, when we say singles, we mean a couple different types. One would be that collegiate young adult doesn't call themselves single at all, that 18 to 21-year-old. They're high schoolers, right? Like that with a little bit more money, and they can't even drink yet. And so legally. And so then you get to 21 and older. You have never married singles. That makes up 63% of all singles. To your point, when we say singles, that's the biggest part. Then you have people that are dating or not, which is what you just kind of alluded to. And we try to help equip churches with phrases. So like marriage isn't the finish line. Marriage is important. It's a big deal. And most people will be married. But if you're in that dating singles phase, you don't want to hear it. What you want to hear is like, how can I be complete in Christ where I'm at right now? Right. And then engagement takes somewhere between 13 to 15 months in America now, because something like 70% of people cohabitate before marriage. And so we just have a culture that even that is a huge life stage. Then you have divorcees, single parents, widows, and same-sex attraction. So when we say singles and young adults, I mean, a lot of those can be made up of those. I mean, I met a 19-year-old widow last year when I was having breakfast, and the pastor was telling me a little bit about her. She walked away, and it was like her husband fell off a ladder 2 months ago and died. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? So the average age for a widow is 57. So we have to think about, all those dynamics. So singleness is a big bucket. So to hone in a little bit with where you're going, I do think that we make it about. Even our secular culture says, don't call me single. But if you go into dating apps and if you look at what Google says, they lie to you. So going back to my Peter Pan example, people will say, don't call me single. And then they go online and type in singles near me. And so we're afraid of that word because we don't see it as a badge of honor. And that doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. Like both sides of those issues would say we don't see singleness, but they all go online and they type in the word single near me and they look for people. So data is a big part of that decision-making process. And so we have to make sure that people remember Jesus was single too, that this wasn't, just built off the idea of getting married. And so anyhow, that's just kind of like my broad stroke. I hear you, and I hear all the time, don't call me single, and I don't really want to be single. And it's like, but you were called to be where you're at. And Paul talks about that, right? And so that's a big part of that background thought.
Yeah, so we have to, and I just actually spoke at a young adults retreat. Some were married, most were not married. The guy reached out to me in the state of Virginia and said, hey, would you come to this retreat and talk to the young men about biblical manhood? And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. But I tell you what would be really cool is let me have a second session with the young ladies and talk about biblical manhood to the young ladies, because those are some of my favorite conversations. And so both of those were rich. And so I'm just, part of what I was able to say to both of them is that you remember the movie Cool Runnings. I use this I use this illustration that John Candy was the coach, and he had cheated, and one of the members of the team asked him why he cheated and how that turned out. And the bottom line, the lesson is, he said, if you're not okay without the medal, then you'll never be okay with it.
Yep.
And so part of what I talked with these folks about is you have to be okay where you are and feel complete, but be open to what God may call you to next.
Yep.
And it's an idea of being content with where you are in life. And we have to practice that in marriage as well, whether, I deal with lots of peers who don't have grandchildren or their children aren't married or whatever, and they're wrestling with discontent. And so part of this is learning to be content with where the Lord has placed us, and seeking his wisdom and his guidance for the next step in life, whatever that may be. Is that a fair way to give some thought to this?
Yeah, I think so. And all those examples, and, Paul's just like, if you can't have self-control, then I guess you should get married. Right? Like, he's real sassy when he's talking in 1 Corinthians there, because he's really like, you're demeaning how awesome marriage is if you just can't control yourself. And so, am I exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit? Do I trust in Jesus, or do I trust in myself? So when we talk about being complete in Christ, it's trust, know, and reflect Jesus. And so those three things make up being complete, but you got to be in community. And that wasn't just a marriage passage in Genesis. It was like, it was not good for man to be alone. Yes, that is a marriage, but that's also not just marriage. And so sometimes we define biblical manhood as get married and have lots of kids and then have grandkids, and that's what you're supposed to do. And it's like, well, yeah, that might happen for you. That may not happen. So when you said grandkids, I tell people, marriage isn't the finish line, and it's like anybody can be married. Getting married to the right person is what you're all waiting on, right? Like, you don't want to marry the wrong person. We've seen divorce over the last couple of decades and what that does. And so you finally get married, and then everybody wants you to have a kid. So instead you go get a pet. And so then you have a couple of pets, and then you finally have a kid. So then you have a boy, and then everybody says, are you going to have a baby girl? So then you have a baby girl, but then they say you're only going to have two, right? And so then next thing you know, you have 5 kids, and they all make fun of you because you have 5 kids. You shouldn't have 5 kids, I guess, right? And then to your point, once you become grandparent age, everybody starts saying, well, how many grandkids you got? I got 37. And you're like, okay, lady from the Notebook, right? Like, that's not like how most people are. But also, like, you're still bowing up this pride that says that all of those things define, like, if their kids and their family are good. And so these marriages, and you see this on the marriage side. So I've been married 14 years to my wife, and had a moment where almost lost her in a car accident. And so you go through the motions of, like, am I defined by this person, or if I'm defined by Jesus? And so we every marriage has moments like that. A lot of marriages don't make it through those moments. Am I defined by my bank account or by this person? And so having that foundation with Jesus makes all the difference. And I have a friend I'll talk more probably about at some point that just kind of has walked through all these phases. But as far as the young adult side goes, I think, merging adult is another word that gets used to try to categorize that person. Adulthood is, when you try to define,
we keep moving the flag on that, don't we?
You lived longer, right? Adulthood used to be 12 or 13, right? And now we live longer, so now it's 30. But you physiologically can't be much older than 30 and have lots of kids, right? Like, there's a difference there. And so we had kids when Christina just turned 30 and she got pregnant. And we're in the Sunday school class with a couple that is like 22, 23 on their third kid. And like, she just comes back 2 Sundays later and like nothing happened. And Christina's like, I still remember what happened, right? To this day, she's like, it was a lot different when you have kids and you're 30. So you think about how that young adult class, we say the word young families so accidentally as pastors and as leaders. And we say, we just want to reach young families. A young family is in their 30s. If you want to reach young adults, you got to reach 20-year-olds. And a lot of them are going to be single. And they'll say, well, we don't have singles in our area. No, you're just not seeing them, right? And so, so anyhow, I think that kind of articulates a little bit of what you're talking about and trying to hone in on some terminology.
Sure, and that's helpful, man. You've even given some insight about some terms to use that can help us better communicate. Let me switch this just a little bit and ask you what you're seeing and hearing at the ground level. Secular research and church-based research with Barna, Lifeway, and everyone else, they're saying that we've got young adults coming back to the church, and specifically young men are kind of leading the charge. So are you seeing that and hearing about it in your circles and the work you're doing there with Georgia Baptists and beyond? What does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting how people see this statistic. So I would say the majority of our churches would say, well, we just don't have young adults. How would we get them?
Okay.
And I've done trainings on how to reach young adults and those kind of things. And but the statistics tell us that people under 45 attend church more frequently than those over 45. And so Gen X and older, they actually only come between 1 to 1.5 Sundays a month. But that 20s, 30s, and early 40s, they're more likely to come 1 to 2 times a month. And that's opposite of what everyone expects. I love that stat. I quoted it in that article because it was fresh when it just came out. And I've used it in some rooms, like, you see how people react to things. And every time I say it, it's like, I heard you backwards, right? That's how people feel about that. But churches, Mike, where I see the people in that demographic that are there, they do serve. They do. They are they're very committed. They come more Sundays. And think about it. I don't have disposable income in my 20s and 30s for the most part.
Right.
And so they act like, oh, these young families are just off on TikTok going on vacations. It's like, no, they broke. Like if they went to school, they're broke, right? Like they don't have houses. They're living in campers. They're trying to figure out how to get their lives together. And you're over here in semi-retirement mode, empty nester, going on vacations most weekends. It's actually the opposite. It's projecting. The other thing I hear is, shame is not a motivator for young adults. So they say things like, but those young adults just won't come at 9 a.m. They have those kids and they sleep in. And I'm like, you haven't had a baby recently. Because when you have a baby, you realize there is no sleeping in. Like that mouth needs food. They're going to make sure you wake up and know about it. So there's no sleeping in on Sundays. But they come in 20 minutes late and they get told, like, hey, if this is important to you, you'll come. And you're like, oh, okay, well, then I'll never come back. Like shame is not a motivator. And so I think it's so hard to see it. But the churches that do have people that are under 40, they see the commitment level is very high. They also say things like that young adults don't tithe, they don't give, and it's like that's because you don't have them and you don't see that they do. Like it's a discipleship issue when we talk about giving. It's not a giving issue, right? And so I see churches that are reaching young adults that thrive and they feel the thriving. So the thriving feels like every week I can't wait to come to church rather than I have to come to church to run a program. And so that 45 and older congregation feels like they're running a program a lot of Sundays and they hope somebody joins them. That 20, 30-year-old congregation person, man, they're just like, I can't live another day without Jesus. My life is awful. And they're just like, everything is fresh and new. And a lot of them are new believers, right? And those kind of things. So, yeah, I think young adults are way more engaged than people give them credit for. But the churches that trash on them, they just don't have them. So that's why it's easier to say that.
Well, and they're going to continue to trash on them and not get the young people that they're looking for. And just because it's not a hospitable environment. You mentioned someone being fresh. I've got a friend that talks about people being freshly saved. And we've got a young man in my orbit that he's been wrestling with his faith for a number of years and just submitted to Christ about 3 weeks ago. He's got 2 little boys. And so, man, his whole world is blowing up. He and his wife, and they're just so excited about everything. He texted me today about serving some other people. So I see that out there. So I affirm what you're saying. Part of what concerns me as a men's ministry guy is if this is true and we're seeing especially young men, where are the seasoned men that are willing to take these guys out and grab a cup of coffee, take them to lunch, take them to dinner, and begin to invest? I'm so saddened. I want to say disappointed or discouraged, but really it's more of a sadness that we do not have well-discipled, seasoned men who see the value and, man, the life-giving encouragement that comes from investing in young men. And so what would you say to a men's guy like me who's working with churches all over the state, trying to mobilize seasoned men to engage that next generation?
Yeah, I would say the word discipleship and disciple making is almost icky to most people. One, they've never done it.
Okay.
Two, it sounds like you're telling them to do a program. So if I say, go meet me at Waffle House at 7 a.m. on Thursday, see you next week. Okay, sounds great. Hey, meet me for the next 78 weeks at Waffle House, and then you're going to be a disciple. It's like, whoa, man, like you're running a strategy on me, right? So I think the principle, Mike, is to tell guys, what does it mean to be a friend worth having? And you break that down, and most people can answer the question, what does it mean to be a friend worth having? 2 a.m. friends. They give you hard words when you don't need them. They listen, right? Like you go through this list of being a friend worth having, and these guys, they relate with that statement. And then you say, all right, now be a friend worth having in Jesus, and then get somebody else to do the same. And by the way, you can do that in this micro group or this small group, or you can just meet somebody, but just be their friend. And when they hear that, especially down here in Georgia, that's where we develop this language. Is in the South, there's just this idea that we're friends, but we're not actually like friends worth having.
Right.
And like, and down here in Georgia, for those, and you might have this up there too, because there's the Mason-Dixon line thing, but like people pull over if you get too close behind them. And I grew up in Ohio. They don't pull over, right? Like they just kind of, so there's like a cultural difference of niceness down here. But if you look up loneliness statistics, 50% of all Americans are lonely, and Georgia is one of the loneliest states in the country. And so when we have 7 million lost people and we all think we're friends with them, and we're not. And so there's just this thing that we're fighting back in Georgia. So when I hear you say, like, how do we get them involved in that? We got to sell the why, not the how. So when you say be a friend worth having, you're really selling the why interaction. Like, why would I meet them at Waffle? Because they need a friend. Didn't you need a friend? And suddenly that farmer guy in Ty, Georgia, like goes, I'll make time for that on Thursdays. I didn't know that's what you meant. Right. What I thought you meant was another Sunday school class. So that's why I think words matter. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I've had that conversation with some seasoned men and asked them to, meet a guy, take him out to Starbucks or whatever. And one guy in particular said, I'm not spending $4 on a cup of coffee for anybody. And I said, well, dude, would you make a $4 investment in someone's eternal destiny so that you can have a conversation with them? And then all of a sudden it twists and turns a little bit. But we do have to see that there is a bigger purpose in these conversations. And, part of what I'm coaching these seasoned guys to do is listen before they lecture and try not to lecture at all, hear the guy's story, because there's so much about posture in this that makes a huge difference in how that relationship develops, how that conversation goes. So I don't know if you agree with that. Or,
I would just say authenticity is the currency of this generation.
Yeah.
They don't want a fake program. That's why they didn't want the 78 weeks at Waffle House. What they want is Mike to show up and just be their friend. And so this morning I started my day off and took Harper to school. And so they asked me last year, hey, would you be a part of this mentoring program? They being my wife and daughter, because I'm like, I'm busy. I don't got time for this. And what is this mentoring in the public school thing? Can I even talk about Jesus? Right? All the negative things you would think. So I say yes, and we get trained. And so last week I met Noah for the first time, and this week I got to talk to Noah, and just assuming he was from a single parent household and that it was hard, I just said, hey, were you with mom or dad this weekend? He never told me, but he just not even realizing I guessed it, right? He goes, yeah, I was with my dad, but I go to my mom's house tonight, and and then he starts telling me about troubles he's having at school, and I'm just like, we're opening. Noah doesn't want me to run the program of mentorship. He just kind of is like, why are you here? Oh, you asked me a question. And then at the end of our time, 2 weeks in a row, first time, bows up. Why am I here? Am I in trouble? Oh, I'm not in trouble. Yeah. Oh, you asked me a question. And then they start opening up. So that's what we want to teach guys to do. We want them to say, okay, curriculum matters, because we're trying to fill the void of what cultural Christianity's been for maybe 1800 years. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying cultural Christianity was, you love Jesus, I love Jesus, my family, I discipled them. Lights went out. We didn't, you had to have candles on after, there's all kinds of things that made this happen. Well, then with the onset of Industrial Revolution, we make the Bible public. But what did we do before we all had a Bible? We were an illiterate society, and the gospel moved forwards with millions and billions of people, and we didn't all have a Bible in our hand. And so I think that's where we have to get back to basics and say it's actually harder to be a friend than it is to run a program. And that's what scares some of these guys.
Well, and so I look at some of the statistics with seasoned adults. Barna did a study a few years ago about the generations being involved in discipleship. And the baby boomers, still their posture is, I don't know enough to be valuable in someone else's life. I have to keep sitting in classes and learning.
Yep.
And that is such a travesty, because their life experience, back to this authenticity being the currency of this generation, they've lived all of this stuff.
Yep.
And so they need to be given permission and coaching and encouragement to share the wisdom that they've picked up along the way, as they've seen the Lord provide, the Lord meet them in difficult circumstances, the Lord pull them out of challenging places. And they need to be able to share those stories, not have another Bible study in Galatians. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we got to get to these smaller conversations. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, I love telling stories. I know you do too. So we're just going to ping pong. But I want to tell you about my friend Cole real quickly. And Cole runs a thing called Man Cave. And Cole has become an incredible friend. I know he'll probably go back and listen to this, but Cole, he didn't graduate middle school, and he's a tree man. That's how it calls him. I'm a tree man, right? And so Cole did drugs, all those things after high school, cultural Christianity, walked away from all of it. And then a pastor said, I'll get to know you, and got underneath a car and worked on a car with him. And so they hung out with each other, and through working on an engine and through talking those kind of things, all the things you and I know that guys, don't want to sit face to face. We want a little bit of
shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, shoulder to shoulder. And so in the middle of doing all of those things, Clint leads him to the Lord. Well, I meet Clint, and he's like, man, I want you to come to my church and come see Man Cave. So I came on a Wednesday night, solid. It was a Bible study. They're handing out hunting knives and talking to each other. And I see guys in the room that are like 9, 10 years old, and guys that are 70 years old. It's this beautiful thing. Clint dies suddenly of a heart attack, leaves behind 4 kids. And Cole is left with this thing called Man Cave, and he didn't sign up to be the leader. And so now he knows the Lord, and so they move it to a barn, and it's this really great barn, no bathroom, right? Bathroom's in the corner over there. We do coffee, the hard old way is what I would call it. Yeah. And Cole is like, hey man, what do we do next? Because these guys, they're coming, we're hearing the Lord, and so we got him some curriculum, and so now I have this 1.5 year relationship with Cole, and he's like, I think I may be called to ministry. And I'm like, I'll see you Tuesday, right? Like when you say those words out loud, you show up. And and he's like, I thought I said something wrong. You really did show up really quick. And I'm like, well, we know in ministry you act when somebody says that. Because when God worked in my life, I needed somebody. And so he's literally in those phases of figuring it out. He texted me this morning. He's got his new little one just arrived this morning. And Cole last week was able to lead his first person to Christ. And so I tell that whole story to say, now he can't do anything else. And you had that experience. I had that experience. When somebody like accepts Jesus and you know what you're saved from, it's just beautiful. And so that's where men's ministry really could be the thing that moves your church forward. It grows your church, not just numerically, but it changes generations when you do that.
Oh, it changes everything. When a guy says yes to Jesus, is even if he's not married, we go back to the single thing. I mean, his persona at work, in his community, what he listens to in his truck, for crying out loud, eventually all those things can change as he engages the word and Christian community. So that's huge. I love that story about Cole. Man, praise the Lord for what God's doing in his life.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. So another thing is, before we started with the formal conversation here, you mentioned that you do a lot of coaching with churches on revitalization. And so we've kind of dipped our toe into this conversation just in these last few minutes with this most recent example. But talk to me as you're coaching churches, pastors, and leaders on trying to bring a dead or plateaued church to some level of gospel enthusiasm to live out the kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. If you're trying to help them with that, what role does engaging men play in that process? How do you lean into that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with a church over outside of Athens right now, Clouds Creek, right? It's a 3 dirt road church and no cell phone service, right? And they're running the most people they've run in 215 years in the church's history, right? Like they're just going and so we started a core team of leaders, and we got the men that everybody respects in the room. And so it starts with making sure men are part of that inner circle, but that we have diverse men that are in that room. And so we got that guy that talks at the end of every meeting that always is right, but he just waits and listens, and he goes, okay, when I talk, I'm going to mean what I say. And we all go, oh my gosh, right? Like you did it.
Yeah.
So mission, vision, values, you want to have clarity to go forward. And so you got to have your mission, you got to have vision, you got to have those value statements, but you got to have a strategy that makes disciples. So that's where men's ministry kicks into full gear for me, is when we say, this is how we're going to make a disciple, and we're going to give multiple opportunities to do that. And we're so used to offering Sunday school and big church that's a foreign idea to us. So when we do those large group gatherings with men, how do we launch that smaller micro group? Because that's what Jesus did. He invested relationally with 12 and went further with Peter, James, and John. And so in the current state of church, when a church is not growing or it's plateaued and they have to get back to basics, which is we were all called to go and make disciples. And so revitalization is a discipleship work. And the backbone of discipleship is going to be getting your men to see they need to follow Jesus, and women do that too. I'm not like full, it's only men kind of a thing, but like there's something to when you have the leaders in the room that are sold out for Jesus, that they're going to go and tell other people about it, like a Cole, right? Who's then going to get somebody to come to his thing because he can't help but do that. Ladies do that too, but those kind of guys, they turn into deacons, and then they go and they live sent, and they may go start another church, right? We need to push back lostness in America. And so we're only going to do that through church planning and church revitalization. So I think the men, you start with that, but then you have to get those people to believe in themselves. And guys don't like feeling embarrassed. We don't like feeling beat down and told that
we want to win.
Well, we're going to win. And so what revitalization does is gives them a winning strategy. All that to say is that I think guys really respond well because we're not shaming them anymore, but we're saying now you can go live sent.
That's huge. I wish more folks would see that and prioritize men. As a matter of fact, another thing that we kind of mentioned is I'm working on my D-men through Southeastern. You were involved in that program at Nobbits and teach there. And the title of my project is Building an Online Course that outlines the theology of church-based men's discipleship. So what does the Bible say about why we should disciple men as a priority?
Yep.
And that's counterculture. It's counter church culture in a lot of cases, but I think there's a strong case there that's made from one end of the Bible to the other that when you invest in men, things change, generally for the better.
Yeah.
And so we want to see that. So that's what we're working on.
Meeting them where they're at, right? So that single dad that maybe has joint custody. I talked to a guy that I've known for 15 years the other day. His marriage is over. He's got 2 girls. She has full custody. It's awful. But I was in California a couple of weeks ago, met 2 other guys, that are early 30s, single dads. One has full custody. So those guys want to know how they're welcomed into it because their life didn't turn out the way that they thought it was going to turn out. So when you find yourself single again, and to what you were just saying as you roll out, what that online looks like, it's like, how do we make that front door welcoming for every guy from every background and every situation? Because then I'm going to recapture, some of those guys may remarry, they may not remarry. In fact, at Table for One, we're launching a kids book, and the kids book is, I don't feel like, it's called Not a Half Cookie. And the idea behind it is that there's a single dad and his daughter, and mom is gone and we don't know why. And the daughter says it feels quiet at our table. And any single dad that's listening to this knows that there's this moment that happens after whatever happened where you're just alone with your kid and it feels quiet. Even when it was bad, it was noise.
Yeah.
And so the book talks about being complete in Christ. And so trying to give a resource to that dad is kind of, we could have picked a single mom, but we know there's a lot of single mom curriculum. So we picked a single dad with his daughters to get those dynamics.
Wow. I love that. I'll tell you what, would you be open to another conversation specifically about how we can reach those guys who are in what we might call non-traditional scenarios with families, because there are bunches of those guys out there and the church really does not know how to serve them well.
Yep.
And so that would be a great conversation for us to have as well. So, well, listen, we're close to our time, and I want to be careful with that. But man, it's gone by quickly. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your candidness with all these with this conversation. So, what else would you like to share with our audience? And how can we get in touch with you down the road if some of these guys want to reach to Table for One, find out more about your ministry?
Yeah, tfoministries.org. You can go there and you can see we try to build resources for the local church. And so we do a lot of coaching and we do catalytic events, but we're not in the retreat business and we're not in the big event business. And so we want to make disciples through the local church. And so we're not a parachurch.
Sure.
And so you can go on there, see a Bible study. The guy that I talked to on the phone the other day, I sent him a Bible study. It's how to embrace your table for one. And so it's like a 6-session study and those kind of things. So you can go on there and check that out. Social media, you can follow us on any platform, Table for One Ministries, and we can connect that way.
Well, PJ, this has been awesome. I've got a couple of your articles here sitting on my desk. We'll make sure we link to those from Lifeway Research and link to your ministry as well. And man, we'll circle back and we'll have another conversation because I think this has been a rich time. So appreciate your time today, brother.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
God bless you. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Noble Man Podcast. We've had a great conversation with Dr. PJ Dunn out of Jasper area of Georgia. And he says it's a little chilly up there in the mountains today. And so winter's on the way, folks. Christmas is only a few weeks away. You better get ready for that. But we are looking forward to being with you again next week on the Noble Man Podcast. And thanks so much for joining us. God bless you. Bye-bye.